Welcome, welcome, welcome to today's Mexican art scene, a virtual studio visit with Andrea Arroyo. My name is Sarah Linda Lickblau, and I am the Director of Education at the Hudson River Museum. And this is the second in our series of virtual studio visits with contemporary Mexican artists who are making their mark on the international scene today, inspired by the exhibition Border Cantos, Sonic Border, Richard Misrach, Guillermo Galindo, on view at the Hudson River Museum through May 9th. Andrea Arroyo is an award-winning artist whose practice includes public art, painting, drawing, and site-specific installation. Her work examines social justice issues with a focus on the status of women in society, addressing issues like immigration, gender discrimination, and environmental justice, and their particular impact on women and disadvantaged populations. Andrea's style is informed by her background in contemporary dance, celebrating the female spirit and honoring the female body. We would like to thank Art Bridges, who has provided support for the exhibition and its related events. This program this evening was developed in collaboration with the Mexican Studies Institute at the City University of New York, Lehman College, and the Lehman College Art Gallery. And Laura J.A. Riggi, Curatorial Assistant at Lehman College Art Gallery, is facilitating our program this evening, which will include audience Q&A. Please note that your microphone has been muted upon entry, but you are in control of your video. You can also activate the closed captioning option provided by Zoom through AI, so we cannot guarantee its accuracy. We invite you to type your comments and questions in the chat, which will be moderated by Laura throughout the program, and whom I will now introduce. Laura, in turn, will introduce us to the artist, Andrea Arroyo. Laura J.A. Riggi has her BA in Art History from CUNY Lehman College and has worked for the Lehman College Art Gallery as a curatorial assistant under the direction of Executive Director Bartholomew Bland since 2016. As a proud bilingual first-generation American, she is passionate about issues of immigration, social justice, racism, and identity struggles. In 2019, she was the on-site coordinator for the presentation at the Lehman College Art Gallery of the Latin American Triennial Progressive Transitions. Laura says, "Art is transformative and liberating to create, curate, and view. I am very fortunate to have been involved in exhibitions and work with artists and curators that I respect and admire." And now I will turn the program over to Laura Riggi. Thank you, Laura, for being here. And thank you, Andrea, for what we are about to witness.
Well, thank you, Sarah Linda, for that very sweet introduction. And now I will introduce everyone to our wonderful artist that we'll be visiting with today, Andrea Arroyo. So as Sarah Linda said earlier, she is an award-winning artist who works in a phenomenal range of media. And just to talk a little bit about some of her amazing things, she does public art, painting, drawing, and also many site-specific installations. Her work has been exhibited widely and is in private, corporate, and public collections around the world. Public art projects include permanent indoor and outdoor artwork for private institution and corporate spaces, including the New York City subway, which is a phenomenal work, which we will see shortly. Some of her honors include the New York Foundation of the Arts Fellowship, Global Citizen Award, Clinton Global Initiative, the United Nations Ronan Laurie Award, 21 Leader for the 21st Century, and Outstanding Woman of New York. As a New York Mexican, we discussed the last time we spoke. She has received multiple grants from the Northern Manhattan Arts Alliance, the Puffin Foundation, the Harlem Arts Alliance, and the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. Her artwork has been published extensively, including the cover of the New Yorker, which is fantastic, the New York Times, the International Herald Tribune, and The Nation, and has been subject of over 200 features in the international media. And that is not even covering everything. This fantastic, fantastic artist. And I'm so honored and proud to introduce, and I'm so thrilled for everyone to be participating and seeing this studio visit with you. So welcome, Andrea, and I can't just wait to continue our discussion.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you, Sarah Linda and Olivia. Thank you, everyone, for joining us from cyberspace. Bienvenidos. So I'm gonna just go through a bunch of images. I'm gonna show you a lot of images. You will see I work in a range of mediums. So I think I'm just gonna start sharing my screen right now. Alrighty. So that's me. This is just a fragment of an installation. So I'm gonna start by showing you my most recent project, and then I'm gonna end also showing you another one of my recent projects. This is part of my installation work, but this is the one that I just installed a month ago or so. This is the Maurice Jumel Mansion Museum. This is the oldest house in Manhattan. And the museum came to me and they asked me to do a project about COVID. And we were right in the middle of the pandemic. It was probably September. And I was just devastated, like, you know, all of us. I was sad and just grieving. And I noticed that, you know, the numbers were just so staggering. It was just so shocking. Every day we had, you know, numbers of people dying and people getting sick. And it was just so terrible, so sad and upsetting. And I thought, I need to focus on something that is beyond the numbers. I need to focus on the people. I need to focus on life. And I was also thinking, we're in the middle of the pandemic. We're afraid of going out. We're quarantined, you know, just at home, mostly just seeing people through screens. And I thought, this is not life. This is not vida. This is COVID, because we were coexisting with COVID. And I said, how do we coexist with, you know, with COVID, with the pandemic, with each other? How do we take care of each other? So I wanted to focus on life and on the people that are also the essential workers that, you know, were on the front lines then and are still on the front lines now. And it was super important to me to have this sense of a space of reflection for the community, to provide a space for reflection. The project has community participation element where people submitted names of victims of COVID, of the pandemic, and we wrote them in hundreds and hundreds of ribbons that you can see. The installation is inspired by, of course, you know, some of my older installations. Is inspired by Day of the Dead altars and by many other traditional art altars from around the world, from Southeast Asia, from, you know, the ribbons also evoke prayer flags, memorial ribbons, things like that. So it's a range of inspirations for this. The project was unveiled on Dia de los Muertos in November, and it went through end of January at the mansion. The next slide shows a detail. So this is made on repurposed mesh. I think it's vinyl, I'm not sure, because it was given to me as a material that was repurposed. I use flowers in the color of cempasúchil flowers from Day of the Dead tradition, but also they're also used a lot in Southeast Asia for memorials and for funeral processions. So you can see the mesh is see-through. It was wind resistant and weather resistant, and it stood the weather beautifully. So that was a good thing. So this is November. This next slide is a detail. You can see the ribbons. So there were hundreds and hundreds of names, and we were writing on ribbons, both myself and some of the volunteers from the mansion, from the museum, and we were adding them weekly throughout the duration of the show. So the community participation element was super, super important in this particular project. We had a couple of events socially, with safe social distance, where people came, we spoke about pandemic, we had a space for people to express either, tell us a story about a family member or a loved one who had passed, their experience with quarantine. So it was just a beautiful event, a chilly morning in the museum, and a wonderful space for reflection and for community. During the pandemic, we could not really be near each other, we could not connect to each other, and this event was just a lovely way to connect, even though we were socially distanced. And it was just a space for healing and sharing. And this is how the exhibition looked during the winter. So it withstood, I think, 3 or 4 snowstorms that were pretty heavy. And we were, a little concerned about the ribbons and the installation, but it just withstood everything beautifully. So we were very lucky in that. So that's how the installation looked at the very end. As you can see, many, many more ribbons than the very first slide that I show you. So again, that's the Maurice Jumel Mansion in Manhattan. That was, by the way, the headquarters of George Washington during the Revolutionary War, and an amazing, beautiful home, historical museum that I invite you to visit. This is my Bronx-related project that Laura was just mentioning. This is my project for the Gun Hill Road station in the Bronx. It's a series of panels on the elevated platform of the subway. And the project is called My Son, Mi Sol, My Planet, Mi Planeta, Mi Ciudad. And it's really about celebration of diversity in the city, both diversity in the community, diversity of people, but also about diversity in nature, because we do have a lot of nature in the city. Sometimes we tend to forget because New York is just so intense and so packed that I think it was important for me to underline that. This is from the same project, and this is the section called My City, Mi Ciudad. And as you can see, this idea of protecting, holding, sharing, just hands holding the city, and the buildings you can see are dancing inside, just in the center. Again, just with the tradition and with my work all being informed by dance, even the buildings kind of dance for me. So. Again, this is Gun Hill Road and the subway number 2 line. This is a detail. So this is faceted glass, and it was fabricated in Wisconsin and then shipped to New York City. These projects, I love this kind of public art. I love to visit sometimes and just see how people interact with the work. It's such a privilege to have permanent art in New York City. So this has been a great experience. The next one is, this is the Maurice Jumel Mansion Museum. The house was built in 1765, and I was invited to have an exhibition there. And when I was speaking to the curator, I was just so fascinated with the house. I live in the neighborhood, and I'm a recent immigrant. I mean, relatively recent, and I adore the house and I love the history, and I was just super intrigued. Eliza Jumel was the owner of the house at some point, and she was, owning property was not the rule or the normal thing at that time. So she was pretty an amazing woman. And I wanted I didn't want to just showcase my work in the house. I really wanted to honor the house. It's, there's so much history in there. And I wanted to integrate my work somehow. So I went in and I researched and I created this piece for the balcony. The balcony is original from 1765. And this was just the entrance to the show when you go in. This is one of the pieces. When I went into the storage space, I asked the curator if I could go in and explore, of course, with gloves and just protection, to take care of the pieces. And I found this piece, and it's a clock base and it's brass, and it's from the Napoleonic times. And I was holding this thing, and it's a tiny thing, but it just held so much history for me, and I was just so excited. And I thought, well, I have to do something with this. And of course, using things to isolate and just have everything protected in a way that is archival. I created this painting that is of Daphne. I do a lot of work that is inspired by women from history and mythology. And the first slide, of course, is the piece, and then the second slide shows how it was presented in the house. This is from the same series. The exhibition I titled Women Unbound. This is titled The Journey, and is mixed media integrated with a jewelry box from England from the 1800s. And I was looking at these objects, these historical objects, and I was just fascinated and intrigued. And I was just thinking, like, who used this box? Like, what was inside? Who made the box? And I was thinking of the journey. Eliza Jumel went back and forth to Paris, or at least that's what we think. And the journey that people took at that time, either from Europe or from any other places that people were coming to New York. And I was also thinking of our journeys, the journeys that immigrants take anywhere, like from leaving home to go somewhere, for whatever reason, and just thinking of what we take with us, what is important to us, and how we hold it, how we carry it. So I made this piece, and it's just watercolor on paper integrated with this historical object. And this is from the same series, and it's called Vesta, and she's the Roman goddess of the home. And it's mixed media, basically paper, watercolor, and ink integrated with 18th century trivet from the kitchen of the house. And I was just looking at the object, and it looked so simple and so beautiful, and it just spoke to me and just told me, just make something with it. And it's just such a privilege to work with historical artifacts. For me, especially as an immigrant, it's kind of for me, it's honoring the objects, but also owning them in a way, because American history is my history too. So again, from the same series, this is called Unlocked Heart. And it's a 19th century trunk, and it's leather and paper and brass. And it had this, just beautiful, sweet, heart-shaped key. And again, it's just a watercolor paper integrated with this piece. And again, thinking of journeys, just, a lot of the objects just make me think a lot of journeys, both, historical and contemporary.
So Andrea, just to ask a quick question about your work in the historic houses. So I find it so fascinating that you've included the contemporary work with some of the historic pieces. And what drove you to do that? I know you said to honor the piece and to honor the history of the piece, but what kind of was your inspiration? What drove you to say, hey, can I go into your storage closet and kind of see what's in there and see what I can use and bring out? And I know that a lot of historic homes have things in storage closets that maybe have been there for 20 years that no one has even seen. So I find that fascinating. And I'd like to kind of get a little bit more from you as what pushed you to actually do that and incorporate those things in your artwork, which is just very unusual and awesome in my opinion.
Thank you. Well, for me, it was about the privilege of having access to these things.
Right.
And also, the fact that here I am, a Mexican New Yorker immigrant who came from Mexico City, in this historical house that holds so much for Americans. And I'm an American too. So for me, it was about ownership and belonging, and being part of, and just making these objects mine for a little bit. And also about the an invitation, the invitation to our community around the house, the community of recent contemporary immigrants, to come into the house to look at these objects in a new way, in a different way. They're not just there as as evidence of history. They're there also as evidence of us, like we are history and history is us. So it was a combination of things. And also I have to say, I'm just very, very moved by historical objects. I'm just emotionally just drawn to them. And I'm also very curious. So that's one of the reasons.
Yeah, well, I love the combination of the historical objects with the contemporary. It's just fantastic.
Thank you. The other factor, and you can see some in the next slides that I'm going to share, is that, you know, I have to work with all of these objects and architectural features, and I have to be really super careful, right? Because I have to honor them and respect them and just be very mindful. And that is something, that is a space that I really like, the challenge of, you know, creating something that is kind of, for me, is revolutionary in my own way of thinking, but it's also something that holds a space of mindfulness and almost, I want to say, tenderness, both ways. Like, you know, I feel the tenderness towards the object and towards the history, and I tend to feel that they are, you know, looking at me, at us, with that same tenderness.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is just going on, going again with the historical houses and artifacts. This is the Elizabeth Cady Stanton house in historic Seneca Falls. And same thing, right? So I'm in this, you know, amazingly historical house in an amazing, you know, town. And I'm standing on the same rooms and looking at the furniture and using the objects that some of these revolutionary women used during their meetings while they were, you know, fighting and planning for, you know, the fight for women to vote. So, you know, I'm many times just, you know, brought to tears just thinking about these things. And I'm sure half the time I'm just imagining or making my own stories. But, you know, that's part of, you know, what we do as artists. We, you know, make our own worlds in a way. So this is called Winds of Change, and it's just an intervention of the facade of the house. And you know, the house was where they were meeting regularly to plan this suffrage. And the wind actually moves the pieces in a very beautiful way, and they almost look like they were, you know, wind chimes or something like that. So it was lovely and a lovely experience. This is inside the house. This is actually Elizabeth Cady Stanton's bedroom. And this is mixed media and pearls integrated with a historic bed frame. So again, just thinking of it, just walking in these rooms, the floors are original. So basically we are walking on the same floors that they were walking on. And again, the challenge of being mindful enough to create work and integrate work with these pieces that are so important, you know, just letting my voice be heard while, you know, hearing the voices from the past as well. So that balance. This one is, again, this is the Cradle of the Revolution, and is mixed media integrated with a historic wood crib. And just, you know, thinking of the children who played there, you know, the toys, and it just moves me very much. My exhibit was called The Center of the Rebellion, there at the Elizabeth Cady Stanton Museum. Different project, same kind of an idea of honoring and integrating architectural features. This is called titled Daphne, and is from my exhibition Memories Interlaced, featuring works on fabric and textiles, vintage fabrics. And this is the Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz Center in New York City, which is the site of Malcolm X's assassination in the 60s. Again, just going into these spaces it just feels like such a privilege and such an important thing to do. And, you know, taking the opportunity also to build bridges between, you know, what's there as historical and the community that we have now, like contemporary world, just people, everyday people, just inviting them, just the invitation to go into these spaces and look at them in a different way. Going now to installation works. This is paper and conte and vintage lace. This is called the Women of the Harlem Renaissance. My exhibit was called Women of the Water. As I said, I work in series, and usually my exhibitions show one particular series only, and I explore, one particular theme, usually one particular medium, and I create maybe a dozen, maybe a few dozen works, depending on the size and the logistics. But every exhibit has one particular body of work. Oh, I'm going backwards. There, okay. Now going to my outdoor work. I do a lot of temporary work with the gardens. I've been collaborating with the New York Restoration Project for a while. My picture is there, to show scale. And I go again into these spaces, usually in awe. I mean, I found this magnificent wall of English ivy in the middle of New York City. And it's just gorgeous. So I was just thinking, like, there's nothing I can do to make that any more beautiful than it is. But at the same time, I think of these things as collaborations. So I think of, my collaboration with the ivy, with the, something that is living and something that has been there for a long, long time. And I use very, very low impact, or actually no impact methods of installation, so that nothing is damaged at all. I'm just like, again, very, very mindful and careful when I install these pieces, so that nothing is disturbed in terms of respecting nature. And again, showing work in unexpected places is also a very rewarding experience. Just finding people surprised at finding these installations. This is called Evidence of Movement, and is mixed media integrated with an existing garden fence. Again, this is a community garden. Another wonderful thing about this project is that most of the community gardens are managed by volunteers, and the volunteers, work with such love. It's incredible. These gardens are oases in the city, and the volunteers pour, their love and their heart into these projects, and it's just beautiful to interact with them, to work with them, to have children and people of all ages just go into these spaces and be surprised by something different, something they hadn't seen before. So in that way, it's a privilege to do that. Another one of those projects, this is Sherman Creek Park in New York City. This is titled Lilith, and this was installed a couple of years ago. And again, it's vinyl mesh, and it moves with the wind, and it sounds, and just you can see the birds just standing on some of the elements of the piece. So it's just this marriage between city and nature that I found just very, very moving. This is a tree, this is an oak tree, a magnificent tree in front of the Jumel Mansion Museum. And again, thinking of nature in the city, thinking of women, and how, the perception or the concept of women as givers of life, as protectors of life, and just, again, honoring the tree, intervening the tree without really impacting it in any way. Just incredible to work with these, magnificent living things. This is titled The Women of Manahata, an homage to the women of the Lenape Nation. Always, reminding me, especially the community gardens or the places where we see nature in New York. I am reminded that we all need to honor the land that we stand in this case, the Lenape Nation. So that's also very important to me as a person of, Mestizo origin and Mazahua origin, very important. A different project going more, this is a commission that I got from the New York Botanic Garden for the Frida Kahlo exhibition that maybe some of you saw. That was incredible. I was commissioned to create this Dia de los Muertos Altar. And it's a combination of traditional and contemporary elements from Dia de los Muertos. And the pyramid is a reproduction of what Frida Kahlo's house in Mexico City in Coyoacan has, and all of the plants are either native to New York. Some of the ones on the background, or the ones that are in the front are the ones that are what Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera had in their house. So again, intervening, interfering, collaborating with nature in a way that is playful and mindful at the same time, honoring, you know, a wonderful feminist woman artist that is been a role model. Going more of on a political, more directly political concept, this is titled Flor de Tierra, homage to the women of Juarez. There have been hundreds and thousands of murders of and disappearances of women in Ciudad Juarez across the border from El Paso, Texas. That has been going on for a long, long time. Usually perpetrators are not brought to justice. And I was invited by the Dallas Latino Theater to create this installation, and it's a combination of paper, cutouts, acetate, and ink. And it had a section with ribbons of with names, again with names of victims of femicide. So again, honoring the stories of these women as victims, but also honoring their lives, because I didn't want to just focus on how they died or were disappeared, but honoring, you know, who they were as, you know, living people. Just, you know, they could be our mothers, sisters, or, you know, daughters. So very important to me to do that. This is a detail of that, so you can see. I do a lot of work that again has to do with women from history and mythology, honoring women's bodies, and honoring nature as well. So just layering different materials to create this immersive installation. This is one of the details. So some of the cutouts are created on paper and Tyvek, and this is titled The Border. And just thinking of, you know, how the border becomes almost a wound, you know, and how, you know, the border is something that is man-made, and you know, nature is there, and we just create these lines that we have to, you know, abide by, and it just creates, you know, a whole bunch of questions for me. This is a different installation. This is titled Daphne, and it's a site-specific work, and it's same materials, Tyvek, paper, lace, and acetate, and it's just layers and layers. And this is the story of that Daphne from the Greek mythology, and you can see, you know, images of snakes and birds and nature and trees and eyes. The story of Daphne, I say, is one of the, you know, first, or, you know, better known stories of sexual harassment or sexual violence, and, you know, it's from Greek mythology.
I was actually going to ask you, Andrea. I've seen the in some of the previous examples you've shown is of Daphne. So I was going to ask you, is there any, I mean, other than the story reasoning, and I do see that you do use historical or you know, mythological references with the Lilith and Daphne and the goddess of the home, but any particular reason why Daphne is something that you focus on multiple times?
I love this. I mean, I have a few characters that I adore, that I've been working, you know, I've been creating, you know, dozens of pieces around. Daphne is a particular interest because she was a survivor. She actually had to become a tree in order to survive.
Yeah, a laurel tree. Turned
Right?
into a laurel tree. Yes.
So, you know, what is more, you know, what more sacrifice do you have to make to become something else, literally a tree, to survive or to avoid an assault? So that's one thing. The other thing is magic. You know, just, you know, these stories have just so much magic and just so much mystery, and I'm intrigued by all of that too.
And she's also, I mean, atypical of transformation, right? So other than surviving, but this idea of, you know, rebirth, literally into a tree, into something else, and transformation into something, making something beautiful out of something horrific story. But great.
Yeah. Oh, going backwards again. Sorry about that. So this is something that I did not consider to be an artwork at the time. This is a piece that I created on the subway. This was in honor of the 43 students that were disappeared from the Ayotzinapa College in Mexico. They have not been found yet. And you know, I had a list of the names, and I was going to a demonstration. I was on the subway, and I took a bunch of Sharpies and a bunch of paper, and I was on the subway literally writing their names, because I thought, well, I'm just gonna go into this demonstration. I don't know anyone. I really don't know if anybody knows anything about it. And I thought that maybe having their names written would, you know, make a difference, or make, you know, something. I didn't know what. And I found that people really interacted with, you know, responded to this piece. They, you know, people who didn't know anything about the case started asking questions. So I had that opportunity to interact with people in a way that I didn't expect. And again, I didn't think of this as an artwork at all. I was just, you know, thinking of something to do that, you know, would allow me to interact or to relate to people, you know, in Union Square. So this is, you know, same thing at night, and I just was there for, you know, a few hours, and people were taking pictures, and it gave me a sense of community at that time, you know, for something so horrific, and it gave me a chance to speak to many people about it. So that was good. After that, I created this piece for a gallery show, and it's, you know, same 43 names written on vintage ribbons. And this I showed in several exhibitions, and actually they took it to some of the mothers of the students who were disappeared. And I was just moved to tears when, you know, some of them were, you know, touching and holding the ribbon with the name of their son. So, you know, one of those projects that really becomes much more than, you know, I planned. And just, you know, they take a life of their own. Going again on, you know, that same topic of women, Flor de Tierra, homage to the Queen of Juarez. This is the project that I have, that it consists of 400 drawings on paper. Installation size is variable, of course, depending on the venue. And this is a detail. And again, it's Daphne. Again, thinking of survival, transformation. And also, you know, thinking of all of the victims as, you know, as women who may have been just amazing warriors and just poets, dancers, and, you know, we recognize the name Daphne, we recognize the name Cleopatra, and I just wanted to bring that to that same level, you know, with the names of these women. A different body of work. This is called the Queen of Shiva, and is mixed media on custom made panels. And the body of work is called Sacred Women. So these are a series of paintings that this is a Xochiquetzal from the Aztec mythology, created on custom panels. Miriam and the Red Sea, again from mythology. Always honoring women's bodies, and also thinking of sacred architecture like temples and pyramids, and just, you know, cathedrals, churches, just taking inspiration from that as well. This is from my series Memories Interlaced, as I was mentioning before, on vintage textiles. This is Aditi, and is mixed media on vintage prayer shawl from India. This is the piece that I actually have on back, and it's a Guatemalan corte, Mayan, and the title is Ixchel. And this is 40 by 30, and the textile is from the 50s, mid-century. This is the cover of New Yorker, and just going into things and works that are published or made for publication. Was published by the New Yorker, and is in a private collection here in New York City. And going now to digital work. So I do a lot of digital work for publication, usually very challenging because in terms of deadlines. But I love doing this kind of work because I can just have an image that has a concept that is very, very clear to me, and it's important to me to express my opinion, my concern about things that are very, very specific. In this case, the border. And as I was thinking of, the wall, and what the real cost of a wall is, especially with our previous administration, where they were, talking about the wall and the cost and how much it was going to cost. I just thought, like, again, borders are man-made, and the cost of the border is going to be in human lives, basically. Again, thinking about borders and walls, refugees and immigrants going around the world, escaping or fleeing different conditions. And, life will find a way, love will find a way. We will go across borders, we'll grow wings if we need to, because, love and survival are forces that are just unstoppable. This I made for right after Me Too started, and again, it's digital art. This was awarded the first prize at the United Nations contest. And just thinking of, for these kinds of works that are digital, something that is super, super simple, and it brings an idea across like in a second. That's good. Just going to the end of my presentation, these are my latest works. These are tiny watercolor on paper. These are layered works. And after the pandemic, when the pandemic started, actually, I started doing this body of work that I call sheltering in love. And as we were, instructed to shelter in place, I was just thinking, I was just feeling so isolated, so stuck, so stiff, without, being able to be in the sun, be with people, dance, just, joy was kind of, being fleeting for me. And I just needed to capture that a little bit to focus on joy. And so I started this project, Shelter in Love, in just when the pandemic started in March. And I've been working on this for over a year now. And these are tiny, 8 by 10 watercolor on paper. And this is another one like that. And the last one. So again, honoring women's lives, honoring women's bodies, and just being in touch with nature, holding the sun and the sun holding us, holding each other, protecting each other, taking care of each other. And that sense of tenderness, basically. I wanted to focus on tenderness because we were just having such a hard time, all of us. So
Andrea, I actually have a question from the chat for you. So
okay.
here it says, I noticed that you either work in black and white or very bright, beautiful colors. What guides your decision in how or if you use color?
Color for me is celebration. I started working black and white when I started doing my Flor de Tierra series. And the inspiration was actually, of course, it was a very difficult, serious topic, the murder and disappearance of women. And I was thinking of, bringing an idea across in a way that had like really, really simple lines. But I also thought of the seriousness of these crimes. And I thought of police lines. In the past, when there was a crime, there's a body, and police made an outline of a body with chalk on the asphalt, many times. So that was part of the inspiration. The other part is just the contrast between light and dark, life and death. And so it's a way for me to just go more inside of myself rather than trying to express what I think or what I feel. I really want for these pieces to be just sharp and quick and just mindful. And I didn't want the distraction of the color. So.
Right, that makes sense. Good clarification. I have a question about the installation that you did in the subway, and I see that you worked for that because it was a permanent installation. It was glass. So, being an artist who works in other types of media or more paper, or like you said, things that are maybe not so permanent. How did you feel about working with glass? Was it super? I know you said you had sent it out to be manufactured and then had to be installed. How did you feel about working with something that's so different from your normal a medium of working?
You know what I mean? One of the things that I enjoy the most about being an artist is that adventure. I am self-taught in the visual arts. I never took an art class. So every project is a wonderful adventure. It's nerve-wracking sometimes, of course, but it is an opportunity to learn so much and to explore and to play, and it just gives me this sense of awe about things that I didn't know and I can discover, and the idea that I can adapt, transform, transport my work into many different mediums is super interesting to me and challenging as well, because of course it's not the same working in your studio and being in control of every little detail, and I am a little bit of a control freak. It is also challenging in that sense, and it makes me grow as an artist, and it also makes me see things in different ways. So it's always really good.
So we have another question from the chat. We have here, regardless of its medium, your work is so fluid, always in movement. Can you talk about the relationship between visual art and dance? Because you mentioned that a little bit earlier. If you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So for me, there's no difference. There is no difference. I just see them as one thing. I danced professionally for some years before transitioning into the visual arts. And for me, the transition was, I just went from being a dancer to being a visual artist from one day to the next. I became a professional artist really quickly. I was very lucky in that sense that I started just making a living and showing my work very quickly. And I never thought about it twice. I was very, very familiar with the form in 3 dimensions. Of course, as a dancer, you work in the 3 dimensions. I started my visual art career doing sculpture because I was just so familiar with the 3 dimensional. So I never think of these two things as two different things. I just, think of it as, dancing with brushes, or that just they're the same thing. Just I see them as one thing. I see everything as 3 dimensional, even though it probably is not. But it's one of the things that I enjoy the most.
Well, your work does, even though it is two-dimensional in that it might be, works on paper or works on, in the way that you have it moving, like you said, you were hanging things outside and in the breeze, it has movement, even though it's static in its, visually it's two-dimensional, but it's still moving with the wind. So it does become a three-dimensional object in its own way.
Right. And the other part is that I don't have any control over that. So that's also, it is challenging, and it's very, very exciting as well. So it's like I install something and I really never know what's going to look like or how it's going to move until I do it. And so it's great. It's one of the things that I enjoy the most.
So we have a comment from very early on. I just wanted to share it with you. It's not necessarily a question, but it's a comment somebody put in the chat. It says, I want to express how much I appreciate Andrea sharing her own journey throughout the pandemic, from the level of sadness to hope, and of course, the beauty of her art. I love the feminism and kindness of it. So I know we discussed earlier at a different time, Sarah Linda mentioned something called artivist, which I find so fascinating, because you do bring up ideas and thoughts and, discussions that people may not want to necessarily talk about or look at in a gallery. And I think that that's so important. You're bringing attention to things that we need to know about, and people might not be aware of, and totally isolated in their own world, that you're bringing attention to, that I think is so vital. And with art, making it more accessible to people, and like you said, having people interact with that is so vital to what you do, and it's great. Especially like you said, the women of Lenape, that struck me so much, because many people who live in New York don't even know who the Lenape are, and they were the native New Yorkers who were here before the European settlers came. And I think it's so vital and so important as an artivist and feminist. And we have another question. Is there a significance to your style in which you draw your figures?
No, I mean, I just flow basically. I really move my brush almost as if I were dancing. So I don't plan it that much. I mean, I make a lot of sketches and things like that, but I really make it flow, and it really, to me, it has to move somehow or to appear to move. So the significance is, in terms of, my own point of view as a feminist, is thinking of women as always having to be flexible, always having to move, to navigate to, life circumstances, to transform, to, talk, and to just be able to just change, transform, flow. Just very, very important. So maybe that's the significance.
Yeah, that's a good point. Always having to change. Now, do you have anything you can show us that you actually have in your studio?
I do. Yes. So I wanted to show you, because I'm focusing right now on small works, and I wanted to show you some of the three-dimensional watercolors that I'm doing. And you guys tell me if this show okay. I'm just gonna have a piece of paper as a background so that they show nicely. So
Okay.
these are I'm gonna show the process of also my three-dimensional watercolors that I showed you. So they start as layers, separate layers. And so that's the first layer. And then, comes the second layer, right? So, and then there comes the third layer. And it is challenging because it's paper, but I really like that it's a little bit unpredictable. And you have these pieces that are 3 layers, and they're really, really fragile. Like each one is super fragile. The cutout, the watercolor, they take a long time to make. And but I love working on these very intricate pieces. They are inspired by little theaters, like shadow theaters, by jewelry boxes, by the objects, like the historical objects that I showed you. These are also about, the journey. And, that, those layers signify a little bit of the journey that we all take. So that's one. And then these are, similar works that are silhouettes of that are made on watercolor and ink, and they are intended to be framed in a shadow box so that you can see, the cutouts.
Yeah, and you could see the three-dimensionality of it. If it's in a shadow box, you can actually see the shadows reflected. Right. That's beautiful.
Thank you. So, and again, this going back to tenderness and love and just the beauty of the female form. Sometimes, something as simple as that can be, to me, like super revolutionary. Again, this is, and going back to using really vivid color, and working in the studio, it's very different than working in the field, just in gardens, public art, either temporary or permanent. And these are like very intimate pieces, and I love working on this. It's just like a song and a dance.
And also it's the ability to create such vivid works, but in a small scale, because you're isolated, or there's challenges with getting back and forth to the studio. So you're making these incredible works and three-dimensionality, but on a smaller scale, because it's more accessible, and it's
right. And also there's so much value on the small, especially these days that we are, as you said, restricted. So this is, again, one of those pieces, first layer. Whoa. They tangle a little bit, which I love. So they dance, they have a life of their own. Second layer, right? And then third layer. And what is interesting to me is that, I make these independently. I design them to be together. But sometimes they kind of want to live by themselves. So it's interesting how, how the whole thing interacts. And, I love just playing with the shadows and just making something small and focusing on that. And the other works that I was going to show you live were these, the sheltering in love pieces, just, just celebrating life and love. And I literally started this series when we were in lockdown. There were many cases of COVID in my neighborhood and my building. And I, for a moment, thought literally that I could not, I could possibly die. So I thought, what do I focus on? So I chose to focus on tenderness.
That's a good thing to focus on, especially when everybody needs, even now that we're coming out of this terrible pandemic, but in the start of it, that's what everybody needed, love and tenderness and understanding. And it's very reflective in all of your work.
Thank you.
I love the feminist angle. I'm a totally mythology and history buff, so I love that you've got incorporated contemporary work, but mythological stories, because they're so relevant today, and your work in the historic houses and bringing contemporary work with historic work and bringing attention to our history, that is everyone's history. Doesn't matter, immigrant, non-immigrant, that you're coming in, you're bringing it in. It's wonderful. Some of my favorite stuff is the historic house stuff, but I do love what you're working on now, because I love watercolor, and I understand the difficulty of watercolor, so I know how hard it is to get those perfect colors and mixtures. It's beautiful. Just beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing and inviting us into your home and your studio. It's been a pleasure seeing all of your work and all the things you've been working on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everyone. Sarah Linda, Olivia. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Andrea, thank you so much. And Laura, such a pleasure working with you on this. And thank you, Olivia, for facilitating. Andrea, I'm just so enamored of what I see as contemporary archetypes, contemporary female archetypes you've created out of, a shared mythology and nature and the female form. But it all comes down to your wonderful spirit and sense of joy and tenderness, as you said. So thank you so much for allowing us into your studio and giving us this rare glimpse of your practice and what's behind it. So thank you again. I want to thank our audience for being with us this evening. And I'd like to remind everybody that the exhibition, which has inspired this visit to Andrea's studio and a slew of programming, is inspired by Border Cantos Sonic Border, which is on view at the museum through May 9th. And we do hope, now that things are getting a little bit safer and the world is opening up, that you can come join us in person. Also, the third program in our series, Today's Mexican Art Scene, is going to be held on Wednesday, April 7th at 7 p.m. And we are going to have a rare visit to the studio in Mexico of Javier Marin, who is one of the most influential and controversial artists working in Mexico today. We'll be looking at his work and speaking with him, and also finding out about his newest project with the Fábrica de San Pedro Cultural Center in Michoacan. So I invite everybody to enjoy our exhibitions and our programs. And thank you once again, Andrea, Laura, and everyone. Be well and enjoy the beautiful spring. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.